Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
Good Sunday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. Welcome to February 1st. Of course, tomorrow would be Groundhog Day, or if you're in Alaska, of course, and you are if you're watching this, it's Hoary Marmot Day. Would be our version of the groundhog. You can always get your latest weather information anytime with Marine VHF, NOAA Weather Radio, or the internet. Weather.gov/Alaska will take you to the right place. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. You can find information online on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube, as you well know. And if you've checked out Facebook today, maybe you got bored with the American football show that's on right now, you might have seen this, an unusual earthquake sequence occurring in the Bering Sea. Not quite ready to call it an earthquake swarm yet, but well, it seems like it's heading that way. Out around St. Paul and St. George, generally east of St. Paul by about 20 miles or so, we're getting some relatively frequent earthquakes there. Just within the last day and a half or so, we've seen several earthquakes above a magnitude 5. Now, our seismologists and earthquake experts at the National Tsunami Warning Center tell us that they're not horribly concerned about a large threat for a tsunami for the Aleutian chain until that magnitude gets a little bit closer to 7. So we got a way to go. We haven't seen anything really outside of that 5 range yet. But they are watching very carefully, as they always do, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in Palmer, Alaska. So hats off to the folks at the National Tsunami Warning Center. We know that you will keep us safe and let us know if anything even more dangerous occurs there. But so far, folks in St. Paul, St. George, even Newtok, reporting that they have felt these tremors out there just east of St. George Island, around 20 miles or so to the east. Now, back to the weather that's above the surface of the earth anyway. We have high wind warnings continuing for the Juneau and the Douglas areas. That'll go until tomorrow now. It looks like those high winds will gradually diminish throughout the day. We've had some stronger gusts in the region. Some of those approaching, let's see, I think it was 45 miles an hour around Skagway. We've also seen some stronger gusts around the Juneau area, about 50 to 55 miles per hour today. So that's strong enough to get your attention. Looks like those northeasterlies around 65 miles per hour will remain possible, but during the daytime tomorrow, that threat should gradually diminish and may even start to diminish later tonight and early tomorrow morning. So improvements are on the way, but still looks like a blustery evening for you. Up the road in White Pass and around the Klondike Highway, similar conditions there, only maybe not as much of a threat for the damaging winds as will be the blowing snow and probably poor visibility, not to mention the wind chill factor. That could drop down to about 40 below if you have to step out of the car for a minute on White Pass. Watch for poor visibility down to about a quarter of a mile. Northeasterlies up to 55 miles an hour could gust through that region. So winter weather advisory is posted mainly around White Pass on the Klondike Highway. That'll go until 3 o'clock Monday afternoon. Now, as we look at the rest of Alaska, we are watching the changes out in the Bering Sea, of course. No, not so much with the earthquakes, but with the storm systems developing on the western side of the Bering and coming up the eastern side of Asia or Siberia. You'll notice low pressure here just south of the Kamchatka Peninsula. We have several other waves that have made their way north into the Chukchi Sea and are rounding high pressure across the Bering Sea. Now that is already retreating and weakening. So what's going to happen next? Well, as that colder air starts to drop south and east into mainland Alaska, we'll start to see more changes across more parts of the continent. And you can see several areas of low pressure out across the Gulf of Alaska as well. One weaker system here west of southeastern Alaska is helping to keep the winds going. That pressure gradient is fairly tight across northern sections of southeast, of course, with high pressure large and in charge across the Yukon. That cold air has to go somewhere, and it is draining out through places like White Pass and roaring past Juneau and Douglas, and those strong and gusty winds will continue. In fact, the wind gusts are still going to be a threat for mariners and aviators throughout the daytime tomorrow, so watch for that on your marine maps and on your turbulence charts as we come up to that a little bit later in the show. In the meantime, it's a fairly dry day for most of Alaska. Very few places reported a whole lot of cloud cover, much less any precipitation, and that was one of the wetter and cloudier spots, picking up, let's see, about a quarter inch of rainfall, but for Annette, that's just a drop in the bucket, quite literally. It looks like many areas out to the west will remain dry as colder air is dropping to the south and east. The best chance for precipitation in the coming days may be the Arctic coast. Places like Barrow and the Chukchi Seacoast may see some accumulating snow. As we look at the weather map here, an occlusion is noted across the central and eastern part of the Gulf. We've got snow on the higher train, rain down below. The snow line looks like it'll stay around 3,000 feet for the next couple days in very southern sections of southeast, so around Hyder and points just to the west around the Misty Fjords. High pressure is anchored across southern Yukon, 1,046 millibars this afternoon. And you can see its ridge extending all the way into the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta up to the north and west around the Chukchi Seacoast. No reports of any snow there by the latest observations. Now that may change fairly quickly as we head into tonight. Watch for some snow showers to develop around the northwest coast, maybe just flurries around Barrow, but things are changing there with the cold front moving to the east and south. And that should cut into Norton Sound and across the lower and middle Yukon Valley as early as tomorrow. High pressure is weakening across the Yukon. As that starts to shift and weaken, we'll see that pressure gradient start to let up a little bit in southeast, but it doesn't go away. Out across southwest, things are dry. Watch for some fog across the YK Delta, and you'll see clouds more than anything else across the chain with high pressure just south of the Gulf of Anadyr at 1,030 millibars. It picks up a little bit more on Monday. You'll notice a little batch of precipitation moves in just south of Kodiak Island out toward Castle Cape and the Shumagon Islands. Cold front's also approaching from the west, and as that continues to move its way eastward, it's not going to have a whole lot of moisture to interact with. Remember, a lot of that's still locked up down to the south across the southern Gulf and across southeastern Alaska. High pressure sitting very close to the Yukon and British Columbia border at 1,029 millibars is still trying to hold the system back, but the cold air is going to win the day, and as that continues to work its way southward, we'll see an onshore flow developing around the northern coast and around Barrow, and again, a better chance for accumulating snow as we go through the day. Look at Tuesday here. Another round of cold air is coming in behind the first round. That is weakening and moving to the east. This frontal boundary will dissipate and is replaced by another surge of colder air. This one will bring some stronger winds to the eastern and central Beaufort Seacoast, perhaps up to Barrow as well. Blowing and drifting snow should be expected, especially in the usual suspect places. Places like Kaktovik and westward should experience poor visibility with that. We'll watch for some advisories from the Fairbanks National Weather Service Forecast Office on that. High pressure just west of St. Lawrence Island, helping to keep that cold, dry air moving out of the interior and over south and western Alaska. Places like Unalakleet will continue to be cool, and at times you may have some serious wind chills across the interior and the YK Delta. South and west, well, probably have to go even further south into Cook Inlet, around Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula to run into any chance of precipitation. That'll mainly be in the form of rain and snow showers. Better chance for just plain old snow showers for the central chain and out across the west from Kiska to Shemya. Across southern parts of southeast, low pressure sitting across the eastern Gulf may bring up a little more moisture further northward toward Sitka and southward toward Craig, Klawock, and Annette and Ketchikan. You'll see that mixture of rain and snow possibly on Tuesday. Areas northward, though, still look fairly dry, but a big point to point out would be that pressure gradient has relaxed there by Tuesday. So the gusty winds that you may experience tonight and tomorrow probably won't be with you at this point, at least as far as it looks now for Tuesday afternoon. Here's what we see temperature-wise today. Southeast saw readings in the 30s, almost a few areas in the 40s there, and most of that was limited to points northward around Sitka. 23 around around Skagway. And northward into the Yukon, temperatures crashed under that high pressure system, anywhere from 20 to 30 below in many areas. Prince William Sound, kind of a west and east story there. On the east, Valdez, Cordova, even Montague Island was in the 30s. Whittier, though, saw fog today and only 7 according to the sensor, 33 around Seward, 35 in Homer, 19 in Kenai, 23 in Anchorage, 34 in Squinta, and 25 in Talkeetna. 11 below in Fairbanks. Fort Greely was 1 below. Northway and Eagle saw temps anywhere from 15 to 25 below. Fort Yukon at 24 below. Arctic Village 20 below. One of the colder spots this morning at 35 below for your low. And Barrow was looking at 4 above by this afternoon. You'll notice Kaktovik, though, still sitting in the cold at 11 below. Around Kotzebue Sound, temperatures were in the single digits, even low 20s there for Kivalina today. 32 in Shishmer with your observation back on the map. Glad to see that. 25 in Nome. Unalakleet saw 18 this afternoon. 7 below in McGrath. A cold and frosty morning there. Around 9 in Bethel. And for King Salmon and Dillingham, temps made it into the 20s today. Lake Iliamna in the upper teens. 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint was 45, one of the warmer spots today, and mid-30s for the Pribilofs, and a little bit milder than that around Atka. Adak was 36 and Shemya was 37. The interior will see overnight lows anywhere from 20 to 30 below again tonight. The Arctic coast, though, is warming up. Most areas to the west of Barrow will be in the single digits, if not in the low teens there once you get around to Point Lay and Point Hope. 9 below in Kaktovik. Unalakleet looking at 6 above. Teens for Bristol Bay. 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, 31 in Kodiak, and teens, 20s, maybe a few areas just making it into the 30s. 4 areas Sitka down toward Craig and Klawock. Most of the interior parts of southeast will be colder. High temperatures tomorrow in the single digits and a little bit below that for Fort Yukon, Northway, and Eagle. It looks like Golcana probably at 7 below. South Central in the teens and 20s tomorrow. Coastal areas heading down toward even Chignik and Kodiak Island, probably in the 30s and 40s, and you'll see that milder weather for most of the peninsula and the chain as well. The YK Delta in the teens, coastal areas in the 20s. Unalakleet 15, 20 in Nome, the Arctic coast back in the low to mid-teens, and southeast in the 30s. And a few areas like Craig and Klawock again might nose up on that 40-degree mark. Watch for IFR across southern parts of southeast again. Here's that front, and south of that is where you'll have visibility issues. North of that is where you'll run into the wind issues. And south and west, well, probably most areas clear except for coastal parts of the peninsula. And then IFR conditions across the central and eastern chain. MVFR developing for the north. Here's your pass conditions. We expect MVFR to develop around Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass throughout the day. A clean, clear start may be possible, but watch for that transition to take place. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, Rainy Pass, Windy Pass all look to be VFR at this point. Isabel Pass should be just fine, visual flight rule there, and for Mentasta Pass as you start up your week. Tonita Pass we expect to see VFR. Porter's Pass, yeah, a little question mark here. We had areas of fog this morning. We had areas of fog this afternoon. Is it going to be VFR? Well, maybe not entirely. I'd put, we'll see. MVFR. Let's go MVFR. Chilkoot and White Pass, let's say VFR conditions right now, but obviously a little bit of a turbulence factor to consider with that one. Freezing levels show warmer air moving into southwestern Alaska, 2,000 to 4,000 feet there, and you can see that colder air starting to work its way southward again across southeast. Here's the surface freezing line, pretty much right around the Gulf Coast, a little bit hovering right over Sitka, southward toward Hyder, and right through Shelikof Strait, and then nudging northward after it moves west of Bristol Bay. Icing potential will hover along that frontal boundary and trough across the eastern Gulf. That's going to be above 5,000 feet, probably a couple patches of occasional moderate within that. And northward as that front swings in below 6,000 feet, temps are cold enough and there is moisture to support it. So watch for some occasional moderate, generally east of Barrow through the afternoon, and otherwise light to isolated moderate across the coastal plain. Your jet stream shows high pressure across the Bering Sea, a pretty decent ribbon of fast-moving wind there working in from the north down the west coast. Another area of faster-moving wind right along the Alaska Range pointing into the continuous 48. And then a broad trough across the Pacific. That's around 90 knots near the west coast and 160 knots out across the North Pacific. At 9,000 feet, you see our trough taking shape now across the interior. This is a totally different picture than we saw earlier last week. Northerly winds coming down the west coast, 20 to 30 knots there. Westerlies across the north coast and the Gulf Coast, controlled by low pressure a little bit further out to sea. It looks like southeast is looking at lighter winds there aloft, and at 3,000 feet you can see those winds just gently blowing over around 10 knots, feeding into high pressure here. And our trough of low pressure making itself known across the interior. There's our northerly winds coming down the coast again, supporting much colder weather for the west. And the Aleutians looking at winds around 30 to 35 knots. So turbulence potential. Southeast, southeast, southeast. That's where it's going to be tomorrow. Looks like occasional moderate there for most areas in the inner channels. And we are going to see some isolated severe, probably around the Juneau and Douglas areas and probably into the White Pass region. So Aviators and mariners plan for more gusty weather in southeast tomorrow, and below 5,000 feet, some occasional chop there from Kiska eastward toward the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula. That's a look at your aviation forecast for your Monday, Groundhog Day. We'll be back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Ed, give me a hand.
Unfortunately, many of the old treatments can be dangerous.
Really, I'm all right.
For example, don't rewarm the whole body by putting the victim in a hot shower. A hot shower or tub rewarms the surface of arms and legs. This sends a message to the body that it's okay to open circulation to those cold extremities. Vital warm blood sent from the core rapidly cools as it passes through cold arms and legs. When it gets back to the heart, that shot of cold blood can cause an unusual heartbeat, which results in the heart muscle starting to shiver rather than pump. The patient then has a heart attack. Another old treatment is to give alcohol. It's also dangerous. Like a hot shower, it fools the body into thinking it's warm when it isn't.
Want to give him some coffee?
In fact, any liquid can be dangerous
No hot liquids.
because the hypothermia victim is not just cold. He may also be in shock, and you can't give any liquid to a shock victim. He could throw it up, draw the vomit into his lungs, and die from aspiration pneumonia.
Let's be real easy with him.
So, to treat hypothermia safely, be slow and gentle.
How you feeling, Hank?
Don't jar the victim. A hypothermia victim who is being rewarmed should be treated very gently. A sudden jar or shock can also cause an apparent heart attack. It is a fact that even though treatment is progressing, a hypothermia victim's body temperature continues to drop before it starts to rise again. The victim is very vulnerable at this time.
Nice and easy now.
To rewarm a hypothermia victim, use only those treatments that are always safe. The first part of treatment is to take them out of the cold to prevent further heat loss. At this point, the body may not be able to rewarm itself. Blankets will not rewarm a cold body. They only insulate. You need a heat source. First, wrap the cold arms and legs to keep them from rewarming too quickly as you attempt to rewarm the body core of the victim. Then, rewarm the high heat loss areas, the head, neck, armpits, sides, and groin of the victim. The most effective, safe way to rewarm hypothermia victims in the field is to use warm objects and body-to-body rewarming. Warm objects are literally anything that is warm, including warm rocks, lukewarm hot water bottles, warm heating pads, warm packs, or even warm potatoes. But be careful. Be absolutely sure that the objects are not hot. You can burn the victim because of their cold-induced numbness. Hypothermia victims won't be able to tell you if the object is too hot. Check on it yourself, like you would a baby's bath. If it feels uncomfortably warm to you, it's too hot for the victim.
This one, let's get this under his neck. Got a stocking cap ready? Yes. Just head up and slide it on. Okay, take it easy. Okay, Hank, lay your head down nice and easy. Let's see if we can't start warming up the sides. Let's go body to body. Just get your shirt off, right?
Body-to-body rewarming is when one or more warm, healthy people embrace the victim within some insulated shelter such as blankets or a sleeping bag. If this treatment is used, one should continue the treatment for at least an hour.
Okay, just take it easy now. We're going to stay here until you get a little bit warmer, okay?
Oh, man, stay there forever. Wow.
Okay.
These rewarming treatments are safe, slow, and gentle. Don't rush them, and be sure to protect the victim from further cold and from shocks or sudden moves. To safely live and survive in a cold environment, you have to know about hypothermia. Hypothermia is the lowering of body core temperature. It's prevented by having adequate shelter for the body, proper clothing. Recognize hypothermia by the victim's physical symptoms and their exposure to the environmental conditions that cause it. Avoid total rewarming of the body. Do not give any liquids, especially hot liquids or alcohol. It's treated with warm objects or body-to-body rewarming, which is safe, slow, and gentle. Hypothermia is a physical condition. It affects the body. Yet a victim's will to live is often the decisive factor in whether or not they will survive.
Well, I always thought survival was physical. You know, if you was really strong, you could make it. But for some reason, I just said to myself, oh, heck, I'm breathing, I'm alive, I'm going to stay with it as long as I can. I did have a lot of water in my suit. I already had hypothermia before I hit the beach. And mainly, it was really hard because I couldn't swim. I didn't have no goal. It was just lay back in the water for the night and see where I was in the daytime. And of course, I didn't know if I'd be near land or not. I was hoping I would be. And it just got to be a battle with myself on thinking of the positive things.
It's a fact that people with mild cases of hypothermia have apparently given up and died, while others have survived under conditions we'd never believed possible. To know what it is, know how to prevent it, how to recognize it, and how to treat it. When was the last time you shivered from the cold?
Don't take your eye off of him!
Hypothermia is the lowering of the body core temperature. The best prevention for hypothermia is to stay dry.
Get those clothes off him!
It makes good sense to treat him for hypothermia.
Give me a hand.
Many of the old treatments can be dangerous.
Come on, we're all right.
Don't rewarm the whole body by putting the victim in a hot shower.
Want to give him some coffee?
You can't give any liquid to a shock victim.
How you feeling, Hank?
Be slow and gentle.
Nice and easy now.
Blankets will not rewarm a cold body. You need a heat source. Lukewarm hot water bottles, warm heating pads, warm packs, or even warm potatoes.
Okay, just take it easy now. We're going to stay here until you get a little bit warmer, okay?
Oh, man, stay there forever. Wow.
High wind warnings continue for the Juneau and Douglas areas through tomorrow. It looks like northeasterly winds may gust up to 65 miles per hour as far as mariners go. Those gusty winds will continue through Monday as well. Look for northerlies coming down Lynn Canal at 45 knots. Stronger gusts will be in the region though, 30 knots as you get into Stevens Passage and down into Clarence Strait northerlies at 25 with 5-foot seas there. Now winds blowing offshore from the east and northeast will also have some higher gusts, especially north of Sitka Sound and then up toward Cross Sound. Look for northeasterlies blowing out of Yakutat at 25 knots. The winds continue to diminish as we head into Tuesday, but don't be surprised for some occasional stronger gusts in the northern half. 25 knots in Lynn Canal. Southeasterlies opposing that at 20 knots with a 4-foot sea, and offshore winds will continue for most areas along the coast at 10 to 20 knots, 7 to 12-foot seas there with a southeasterly flow just outside of the Dixon entrance at 20 knots. For South Central, a much different situation. Light and variable winds inside and outside of Prince William Sound, 10-foot seas along the coast down toward Gore Point, and southeasterlies blowing into the Kenai Peninsula at 15 to 20 knots. Winds become more variable west of the Barrens. Northeasterlies remain light coming down Cook Inlet, and 7-foot seas are expected inside of Shelikof Strait on a northeasterly 20-knot wind. For Tuesday, the winds will stay about the same there in Shelikof Strait. Easterlies coming into Kodiak Island at 15 knots, and you see our light and variable winds there across the northern Gulf continue at 2-foot seas on the inside of Prince William Sound, 7-foot seas on the outside, and northeasterlies pick up just a little bit there as you head south of Kenai, 15 knots with a 4-foot sea expected for Tuesday. Inside of Bristol Bay, northerlies at 20 knots with a 2-foot sea, also looking at northerly winds coming down toward Cold Bay and the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula. Northeasterlies west of Kodiak Island, all the way down toward King Cove and Sand Point with 12 to 13-foot seas on a 30-knot wind. Similar conditions there on Tuesday with very little change. Northeasterlies inside of Bristol Bay at 25 knots, 4-foot seas there, 13-foot seas there as you head west of Port Heiden with a 30-knot wind coming in from the north and east. For the Aleutians, a broad northeasterly flow sweeping across the chain, 25 to 30 knots on the Bering Sea coast, 25 to 30 knots on the Pacific coast, 11 to 12-foot seas on the south side, the Bering Sea coast about 9-foot seas there. More of an easterly flow once you get west of Kiska out towards Shemya. By Tuesday, you'll see all areas becoming northeasterly, wind speeds still hovering around 30 to 35 knots, with 13 to 14-foot seas on the Bering Sea coast, the Pacific coast a little bit higher than that, 14-foot seas there between Nikolsky and Atka, I should say, and 12-foot seas there south of Adak and Atka. So all in all, a northeasterly flow brought to you by that high-pressure system anchored up over the continent. You'll get northerlies coming down the west coast on Monday. Ice potential there will limit some of the seas, but we're also going to watch for freezing spray because of that. 7-foot seas around St. Matthew, 6-foot seas as you head south of Nunivak Island into Kuskokwim Bay, and northerlies around St. Paul and St. George with an 8-foot sea on a 30-knot wind. Northeasterlies shift again on Tuesday, 25 to 30-knot winds in most areas. We're still watching for freezing spray near the ice edge with an 11-foot sea around St. Paul and St. George, 30-knot winds there, 25 knots coming in from the north and east around St. Lawrence Island. And for the Arctic coast, northerlies just outside of Kotzebue Sound, otherwise a westerly flow behind the front from Barrow down toward Cape Lisburne, around 15 knots, and southeasterlies coming off the central and eastern Beaufort seacoast at 20 knots. For Tuesday, all areas, with the exception just outside of Kotzebue Sound, are blowing in from the west behind that front, setting up for the next front to drop through. 15 to 30 knots, the strongest winds there across the central and eastern coast there. The Beaufort northerlies outside of Kotzebue Sound at 15 knots. As we recap tonight's weather, watch for several fronts to make their way toward and through Alaska for the interior. Tonight, one front is making its approach with snow showers developing across the Chukchi seacoast, flurries around the Barrow region. Strong winds are expected across the northern half of southeastern Alaska with winds around Juneau and Douglas area that could reach northeasterlies up to 65 miles per hour. That would be the stronger gusts, though. As we go through tomorrow, that pressure gradient will diminish, and so will your winds. Low pressure may keep some rain across southern parts of southeast, a little bit higher up than 3,000 feet, and you'll find some snow there. Rain and snow showers south and west of Kodiak. Watch for a better chance for that to develop as we head into Tuesday. Most of that still limited to south and western Alaska Peninsula Pacific coastline and across southern parts of southeast with accumulating snow in the north.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.